We believe that the criminalization of marijuana and the so-called war on drugs has been really a terrible policy direction, that legalization, regulation, and control of marijuana would be far superior than the current kind of control by illegal drug interests that we have now. We also, there's currently a prohibition even on the research around marijuana, and consequently, we really don't know what its medical capabilities are. We need to institute research, which is prohibited at this time. I'm not familiar with the status of the law in every state. I know that over 20 states have legalized marijuana for medical use in varying degrees. Some are very restrictive and some are very broad laws, and that there are another 4 or 5 states that have legalized medical marijuana and what's called personal use of marijuana. Ohio is, I believe, the only state that allows for some personal growing of marijuana plants. I believe the issue 3 allows for personal possession of up to 4 plants for growing your own marijuana. Mm-hmm. So there are 2 levels of limitation, and I compare it usually to either the production of alcohol or tobacco, right? That the state of Ohio and every other state carefully regulates the manufacture and the sale and distribution of alcohol. Mm-hmm. I don't know how old you are. You might remember that for years in Ohio you could only buy liquor at state stores. Mm-hmm. And that has gradually loosened as the government's observed ways that you can have more sales but still regulate it and control it. Marijuana is a very similar product. It's not, we're not selling zucchini off the roadside stand. Mm-hmm. This is a product that needs to have careful regulation and inspection. And we've seen this by comparison. Colorado has a fairly loose manufacturing and distribution system, and their marijuana has been tainted, not by illegal drugs, which you find in the illegal drug business, but mm-hmm. by mildew, by insects. It's, there's no one doing product control. Issue 3 allows for regulation and product control by limiting the number of manufacturers. In the first 4 years, it does allow for the addition of additional manufacturers. And it also limits the number of licenses as to who can sell the product. We view those as 2 very good things. Mm-hmm. State law does not call for severe punishment of a small amount of marijuana. However, the suspicion that you might have in your possession a small amount of marijuana can trigger a whole series of events that lead to prison and lead to inappropriate and unfair enforcement. So the police officer says, I think I detect the smell of marijuana, or I found a remnant of a marijuana cigarette in your ashtray. Therefore, I'm going to search your car, frisk you, tang you, have your car impounded. And all of these things have a cost, both financially and with prolonged contact with the justice system.
Mm-hmm.
So although it is on the surface true that it's, quote, just a ticket, and in most cases the officer has the option, she can write you a citation. She can also take you to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that people don't think about is that if you're held for 24 hours, who's looking after your car, your children? You're not reporting to work. So those laws are still extremely punitive, and they tend to come down. We know that white and black people use marijuana, and they self-report on this. White and black people use marijuana at about the same rate right now.
Mm-hmm.
Black people get arrested. White people don't.
Right.
So it has this, disparate impact on the African American community. The story I often tell is that, if the children of one of my friends is caught with a marijuana cigarette, the worst that'll happen is the officer brings the child home to her parents. If you're African American and that happens, the worst is they take you to juvenile detention. You're held there. Your parents have to come in. Maybe your family gets kicked over to the social service section, or maybe you're charged with being unruly. So the consequences are very different,
mm-hmm.
very costly.
Yeah.
I think the marijuana law would help. I don't think it's an issue of individual racism. I think it has more to do with resources in urban areas versus suburban. In the suburbs, you might find that the police department knows more people. They have good relationships with the residents. They're more likely, we don't want to ruin the life of this child with an arrest. In urban areas, the police don't have the same resources where they can take the time. So it's just easier to go straight to juvie and hand the family off to either the Justice Division or the Social Services. These minor marijuana offenses are too often the reason for kind of piling on other charges. Mm-hmm. Urban police departments simply don't have the resources and the staff or supportive agencies to do more. Well, there's no research that supports the cops like to talk about, or as do some quote experts, marijuana is some kind of a gateway drug. Mm-hmm. There's actually no science that supports that at all. On the studies of teen drug use, interestingly, they're much like teen pregnancy. Kids that are highly motivated to succeed in school, to go to college, feel that they have a future. That's actually the number one attitude, are less likely to get pregnant and are less likely to abuse all substances. Again, think of alcohol and marijuana together. The kids that are binge drinking are not the motivated kids. The kids that are experimenting with drugs often are not the motivated kids, right? So it really speaks to this issue that we need to, be tough, criminally tough in the justice system on alcohol and drugs. We need to be looking at better ways to motivate young people. Here's the frame I would take. If marijuana is legal and it's still illegal to sell it to people under 18, we should be able to spend more time on the dealers who are peddling drugs to children, because we're not looking at the dealers who are peddling drugs to consenting adults. We're not looking at illegal drug sales because the product's not available to adults. We have a very contained population to serve, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big part of legalization is to get rid of the illegal traffic in drugs. If he's saying marijuana is the gateway drug, why wouldn't you go after those people? And aren't they selling both at the same time? I mean, it's kind of, you can't have it both ways, right? Mm-hmm. So again, I'd compare it to alcohol. I think that is a concern, but it's not reached by making it a crime. We don't make alcohol a crime for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an exact parallel to marijuana. There have been some reports, for instance, of children in Colorado getting into marijuana that their parents have. That's an education issue. We have to teach people that if you have marijuana, just as we would with alcohol, with oven cleaner, with wearing a seatbelt, you have to take steps with guns, right? Take steps to be a responsible parent. But we don't outlaw any of those products. First of all, it's not legal to drive under the influence of alcohol, right? And it's currently not legal to drive under the influence of marijuana. People do. So changing, I don't know how this is going to change that. There are a couple of needs, and I think they'll be filled very quickly. There's currently no good drug test for the amount of marijuana in the bloodstream that shows impairment, where we do have that in alcohol, right? You have a certain level in your blood, and that's impairment. So that needs to be developed. But in the meanwhile, it is illegal to drive under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I'm not sure that legal marijuana will lead to more smoking of marijuana, because we already know that studies. The study reported on CBS News this morning that the number of adults who report using marijuana, even though it's illegal, has doubled over the last 10 years from 4% to 9%. Mm-hmm. So it remains to be seen. We don't have enough experience yet in Colorado and Washington. Will there be a big increase, or will it just kind of... The other thing that's kind of predictable is that there is initially an increase and then it levels off. Mm-hmm. Okay. The novelty of it, and then... And, a question we've been asked, what about employment? Mm-hmm. Can employers still drug test? Absolutely, because they're not drug testing for legal or illegal use. They're looking for, are you able to do your job? Mm-hmm. Right? Now, we would argue, and we have for decades, that the way to make that determination is not by testing for drugs and alcohol. It's by doing task-related testing. So, for instance, at 65, I might not have the ability to drive, to have the good reactions to drive an automobile. But there's no way to stop me from driving an automobile. Mm-hmm. The way to equalize that is that we should all be tested in skills tests rather than drug tests. Mm-hmm. Which, there are also a million ways to fake out those biological tests. Whereas, if your reaction to pull the lever on a machine isn't fast enough, for whatever reason, age, eyesight, drug use, then you're not capable of safely doing a job. Well, as I said, the employer can take immediate action on that. Mm-hmm. The other to keep in mind, I think, is that people are thinking in kind of very short term about this. Clearly, there is a national movement toward social change. Polls are showing that a majority of people support some sort of legalization. If you ask just about medical marijuana, it's, I think, 84%. If you ask about personal use of marijuana, it's at 55 to 60%. All these changes in state law, there are all these ballot initiatives. So, you know, we're looking at a movement, a social movement that's going somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It will take time to work all of these issues out, just as it did in the whole century-long battle over alcohol. You know, we had alcohol in this country until it was forbidden, and you could drink wherever you wanted, all you wanted, with no limitation. And then the pendulum swung to total prohibition, and we saw what that brought. And now we struggle to bring it into a reasonable and responsible practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of what this is. What's most important about Ohio, I think, is that if a relatively conservative Midwestern state votes in favor of legalization, that's a message to the country. The reality is that marijuana won't be legal on November 4th. It will take, I predict, several years before all of this is figured out. And remember, grow sites have to be established. People talk about this as, oh my God, it's going into the Constitution, so it'll be there forever and ever. Well, they misunderstand the state constitution compared to the Constitution of the United States. It is not impossible and even not that hard to make changes to the Constitution of the state. And in fact, I think, 10 years ago, people put an amendment to the Constitution banning gay marriage in Ohio. Mm-hmm. Well, 10 years later, the Supreme Court made a ruling that just struck that down. The state, it's not the permanent document. So I sincerely wonder what system they would propose to substitute it. Marijuana, like alcohol or tobacco, will be a multi-billion-dollar business.